All right, so we are at the present moment several weeks into the presidency of President Agent Orange, Dorito Mussolini, whatever you want to call him. And
the Manchurian Orange candidate.
I want off this. I want off this ride, Mac. I want it to stop. I don't like this. This is not fun.
Yeah, I know. It's like back when you're 6 years old at the park and your friends convince you to get on the merry-go-round.
Oh yeah, and then you end up puking.
It's
afterwards.
It's gonna be so much fun, and they just spin you and spin you and spin you, and then you want to get off, and
it's like a day can't pass without something either horrific or unbelievable or just stiflingly incompetent happens.
And those are the good days. That last one.
Christ, I mean, everything. I mean, I remember. I remember back when during the election was happening, and you were saying that, oh, you know what, Trump will probably just end up being a regular old, normal president, and maybe even better than average. And
yep,
it took no more than 11 days to be proved wrong.
Well, he gets results. He cares about using executive orders in ways that certain other previous presidents seem to have trouble doing.
You mean Obama?
Yeah, that's the one thing I kind of realized almost immediately was that almost all of the stuff said about why Obama didn't executive order this and that was all basically just political lies.
Yeah.
In the end, it was all just actually he could have done it. And then the whole thing of but he would have looked bad, or it would have been stupid, or it would have just ended up in the courts. It's that apparently was never a real impediment.
No, you could have just done it, and if there were, if the courts took issue with it, then you would just deal with it. And I think that as much as I think that what Trump is doing is a total overreach of executive power, I think that it kind of, in some ways, really makes a mockery of the way that Obama ruled the country for, his 8 years, where he could have just done a bunch of executive orders and could have just changed things at the stroke of a pen. And as it turns out, the Republicans were going to be a bunch of crybabies and losers and aggressively anti-progress, no matter what he had have done. So
and now look who the crybaby losers are.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I think more than anything, what I'm shocked at is just how, I don't even know why I'm shocked at this, but Trump is so fucking stupid. Just listening to him talk, it's like he's a 13-year-old boy in the body of a 70-year-old man.
Yeah.
Where he can't even, he makes George Bush look like an intelligent figure. Trump is just he doesn't even understand the words coming out of his own mouth.
Well, Bush if you're talking about a 13-year-old, right? Bush was the stupid child who did what he was told, basically.
Right.
He was the polite one who maybe acted like an idiot, but always knew where the line was.
Right.
Where the adults had their business to do, and he could play over here kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trump is awful, sure. I don't know if it's really worse than I expected, because I was all over the fucking place. I mean, on the one hand, it was maybe he'll fucking be the end of the world and destroy everything, or possibly just be disappointingly mundane almost. But that second one definitely hasn't happened, mostly. But what really worries me about all of this isn't even so much Trump as much as the fact of how totally desolated the American political system is. To think of what their situation would be like right now if you had someone who had even a modicum of charisma, but had his same political views. The fact is he is not trying at all to work with anyone or to achieve his goals. He's just sort of fucking throwing shit out there and hoping it sticks. There's nothing clever to it or even so much manipulative about it. But if you had someone who was both of those things, I don't think that the American political system or media would even care to point it out. They're so bad at... I mean, there's this whole principle in American politics of balances of power and checks and balances, and sort of this, that there's this interwoven system of relationships such that no one person or no one faction can ever really gain sort of ascendancy over everyone else. But Trump proves that is at the very least extremely weak. But even worse than that, I think that he points to a situation in American politics where there is no one to stop someone like Trump, really.
I mean, the nomination hearings for his cabinet appointees were just farces. Like,
yep.
I mean, okay, on one hand, Betsy DeVos, the education secretary, proved herself to be completely inept and poorly informed about the department that she's running. And it was just basically a dog and pony show. And the Democrats said, oh, well, you're clearly not qualified for this. And then she got rubber stamped anyways. And then you had Rex Tillerson, who was showing himself to be like lying, openly hostile to the people that were overseeing the hearing. You know, he just gave completely inadequate answers, and because the Republicans control the hearings and they're just kissing President Trump's ass in order to curry favors, then the whole thing is just it's a fucking satire. It's not even meaningful at all.
Well, competency was never a requirement for political office or appointment or anything else. So much of those sort of ideas, as far as like the president being the most qualified American for the job, or these appointments being the best people in your party that represent these particular departments, was never true. And it's simply just, I think that what Trump has done more than anything else, he's stripped down, possibly by necessity, and I think that's partly the problem. A lot of the illusions that people have in the government and how it functions and how they always how they think it's supposed to function and still be functioning even now.
Right. That
this is not the sort of person a president should be, is often how a lot of these arguments are put forward. A president isn't supposed to be a crass goon. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing in their fucking system that actually makes that a rule. There's no requirement there. And so it's often just like a moral appeal to, well, he shouldn't be. It denigrates the majesty of the office, essentially. And that's just, as far as I'm concerned, personally, I don't care. I think on a certain level, the amount of respect people currently have for the presidency is about as much as they should have.
So you mean when you say the amount of respect that people have for the presidency right now is about as much that they should have, do you mean that to just be a rebuke of the entire American political system?
Essentially, sure. Yeah. But I think that a lot of people are placing on the shoulders of Trump problems that have been there for either decades or throughout basically the whole history of the American political system.
Yeah, well, and I think that you can sort of extend that critique to the way that bourgeois representative democracy works in and of itself, where it isn't really a sufficient way of having a democratic society where you have, big business and money in politics and blah, 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 blah. It has never really been a grassroots, bottom up, what we would want to see a sort of planned democratic socialist economy and political system. A capitalist democracy can't even hold a candle up to that, and it is really a lot of this repetitious, almost symbolic hearings and whatnot, where we all know at the end of the day corruption does happen and incompetence does happen, and no matter how hard it tries, a capitalist democracy cannot actually fulfill the democratic aspirations of working people and what they really want from society.
Yeah, and I do think that Trump, I mean, the democracy that goes on in particularly the American political system, but really all of them, all similar ones, those decisions are made outside of the hearings. They're made in someone's office or a back room or whatever, in a hallway. You come to an agreement, you do your horse trading, you get a compromise in principle, and then something comes out the other end, and then you all get credit for it, basically.
Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to work. It seems like what's Trump's done, and what's really seemed, at least as far as I understand, frustrated a lot of his opponents, is that a lot of that process is now just happening in the open.
Yeah.
Like a lot of that bullshit is just, I'll just negotiate and talk about this shit just however, be very flippant with it. When, the traditional way of doing it is, no, you can be flippant, but you have to be flippant outside the public eye, because when you start exposing people to how our political system works, they like it a lot less.
Yeah. And you look like a jackass.
And he diminishes the credibility of the American political system.
Right. Yeah. And it undermines, people's faith in the system, quote unquote, overall, where people, if they don't have this sort of, I don't want to quite call it a fairy tale, but this sort of national story to believe in, then people might start looking for other answers, and especially young people in the United States, where a lot of them are becoming disillusioned with capitalism and some of them more and more are interested in socialism and other options. I think that the ruling class in America has good reason to be worried about that. One thing, on a slightly different note, I find so... I can't even think of an adjective for how I feel about this, but the lack at which his just general lack of an attention span and ability to just concentrate on things and read things, where, you have the tales about the new White House staffers working in the dark because they can't find they can't figure out how the light switches work, or they're so unfamiliar with the building. But for me, the most telling example is the stories of Donald Trump. He stops working at 6:30 p.m. and puts on his bathrobe and just gets bored and watches TV. And these memos that he has ordered, his memos be no more than 1 page long, all in bullet points. These are memos that would normally be small books, basically, where he just can't concentrate. He doesn't read. The guy's probably never read an entire fucking book in his life.
He probably read his own book.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you have, dare I call him, President Steve Bannon working 16-hour days, really making sure that he gets his policies put forward and well fleshed out and everything. Donald Trump is just not just a crass, classless goon, but just an imbecile, like a lazy, small-minded idiot who can't concentrate. Apparently, when they're having, there's a lot of divisions within his cabinet too, and when they have these policy discussions and it starts getting bogged down in details and minutia, Donald Trump allegedly just changes the subject because he doesn't understand what they're talking about, and he always wants to appear as though he's in control, and so these details never actually get flushed out. It's certainly not when the president is around, right? So he's really proving to be remarkably inept, inadequate. He just doesn't know what he's doing, and I think that the people around him with really, people like Steve Bannon and Mike Pence, people with really well flushed out extreme ideologies that have agendas that they want to put forward, they're the ones putting in the hours at the White House, and they're the ones that are really, I think, shaping the policies and the behaviors of this administration.
I agree with you, although I wouldn't be surprised that if in a year or two Steve Bannon ends up being fired as like a sacrificial thing.
Maybe.
If a big fuck up happens, it's not going to be Trump who's going to take the blame. It'll be Steve Bannon.
Also, Trump allegedly got pissed off at Steve Bannon for... This was funny when Steve Bannon tried to get himself appointed to the National Security Council, and Donald Trump signed off on it because he's either functionally illiterate or just chooses not to read.
Well, he's got 100 things in front of him every hour. You eventually just give up.
Yeah, and so Trump just signed it. It's like, whatever, fuck it, another executive order. And apparently he got quite angry at Steve Bannon. So Steve Bannon could overstep his bounds to the point where he insults Trump's ego too much, at which point he might be fired. But, Christ, that's not to say Bannon is a fucking monster and is certainly the most ideologically extreme amongst the people there. But I wouldn't trust anyone around Trump. I wouldn't have much more faith in anyone else around him, because everyone else in his cabinet are ideologues or extremely conservative or Wall Street bankers that are predatory to poor people, womanizers, wife beaters, religious fundamentalists. It's truly a nightmarish.
It's a cross section of American politics, is what it is.
Fuck.
I don't know. Strom Thurmond was around for like 100 fucking years. I mean, in American politics, a lot of these kinds of things have been around for very long. I mean, particularly like the religious stuff.
Yeah.
Religion in American politics have been, hand in hand for, since like World War II, basically.
Especially since the 1980s with the,
moral majority and all that crap.
Yeah.
There's, once again, I think a lot of what this is Trump is kind of, and this is sort of the question that's been rattling around in my mind, is this just Trump's sort of crassness that he sort of allows these people to be openly what they were at all this time anyway? Or is it that the American political system is so weak that it can't really depend on the illusion anymore?
I think it would be the second one, because we have to remember that Trump is not himself shaping history here, really, in so much as Trump is a symptom of things already happening in the economy and the political system. So I think that it's the answer to that is that the political system is so weak that it's allowing these aggressive right-wing forces. There's no real movement on the left to counteract their pushes towards more extreme policies and more extreme right-wing douchebaggery, I guess, for lack of a better word. And it reminds me of that old quote, the only thing it takes for evil to win is for good men to do nothing. And I think that's effectively what's happening here, is for all the good men and women in the United States, there isn't really an avenue that they can pursue to effectively combat Trump and the things that he's doing. There is no labor movement to speak of that's powerful enough. The left is really fragmented. The Democratic Party is part of the same apparatus that the Republican Party belongs to.
Sure, but Democrats at this point, I think you could say without too many obnoxious caveats, is like, it probably wouldn't be this bad, mostly, or at least maybe people just wouldn't be this mad, but either way. So I guess what I'm thinking is like, okay, you have the Democratic Party, a massive institution, organization, millions of members, people in the government at every level of government. It would seem that you have there, on the face of it, something that could directly respond to Trump. And I don't think it's impossible, right? Like, I don't think there aren't any levers that would be that are available to them at all that are there. But it seems more that there's just this distrust of the sort of techniques that could stop someone like Trump.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, protesting, for one. I mean, even just that on the most basic level. And the Democratic Party is, like with the massive women's marches that were bigger than his nomination bullshit, but whatever.
By 3 times.
Yeah, all that happened. And the Democratic Party, like, time and time again, they talk about how they support these things. They're in favor of women's rights. They are in favor of, all of this sort of stuff that people on the left also talk about. And they present that as evidence that they are a left party, basically, whenever they feel like it. And yet, on a practical level, they don't do any of that stuff. They certainly don't initiate a whole hell of a lot of anything.
No, well, it reminded me of when Obama got a lot of credit for being on the right side of history when gay marriage was legalized on a federal level in the United States, and he basically did nothing with regards to that. There was a Supreme Court decision, and he didn't sign any executive orders making marriage between homosexuals legalized. He just basically applauded it, and people said, "Oh yeah, he was the he's a good guy with the good opinions." And also, I think that especially in the United States, but here in Canada and elsewhere as well, it seems that the left versus right debate dichotomy has mostly been put into the corner of social issues in terms of respect for minorities, refugees, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, like all that stuff. The environment, these social issues, more and more what defines whether a person identifies as left-wing or right-wing. When the old traditional definition of left-wing or right-wing, when it was mostly economic issues, labor versus capital and that sort of stuff, that is, I think, increasingly over the last 30 years as neoliberalism has become just the status quo in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union, where that's just economics. That's just how it works. You can't question that sort of stuff. And you have parties like the NDP, the Democrats, whatever, not questioning capitalism at all, not questioning these the fundamental ways that the economy works. And so the debate is increasingly just in the realm of social issues where you can't even really criticize the basic functionings of how our economy is organized without seeming, like a lunatic. Although in recent years,
in the last 3 or so years.
Well, since the financial crisis, more and more, alternative views are sort of allowed or considered.
Well, they're also increasingly more popular, and this sort of goes hand in hand with, and I think it's somewhat ironic. The whole left-right argument is often placed as, right-wingers are religious, basically conservatives, and left-wingers are, socially progressive, granola-eating hippies. And so when you have, say, poll after poll coming out showing that people distrust the government and the media more than ever, are in favor of socialism or something, or a system other than capitalism more and more than ever. A lot of that feeds into the exact same kind of attitudes that helped Bernie Sanders, but also the same attitudes that helped Trump win.
Yeah.
This is where a lot of that sort of the social left and right dynamic loses all kind of all coherence. Because it's a lot of the people who voted for Bernie Sanders or would have voted for a socialist candidate voted for Trump. Yeah. Because what people were looking for in both cases wasn't, I'm a socialist, so I'm going to vote for the socialist candidate. It's, I don't like what things are going on. This guy's talking a lot of really good stuff. He says he's a socialist. Therefore, that's what this set of good ideas is going to be called. Yeah. And so people, and it's kind of funny that uneducated, quote unquote, people, not political experts, are a lot more principled about their politics than the political experts are, who go on and on about the identity politics, or who has a better haircut, or who was dressed better, or who looked more sick in the debate, or whatever. Yeah. And people end up voting for I have a problem and I want a solution, and given that I only really have two candidates in front of me, which one do I think can possibly solve the problems in my life? And people who voted for both candidates were basically doing it on that basis. Yeah. They were both afraid of the alternatives too, but you ended up saying, well, what's the best choice I have here? Not, who's the nicer person, because they were both deeply despised by even the people who voted for them. In
many cases, yeah.
And so it didn't really matter. Unfortunately for us, that doesn't, it doesn't automatically mean a damn thing if people are just dissatisfied and vote for anything. But that does sort of, I think, point to both the strength of Trump's election and his incredible weakness, because that disdain and hatred for the government and the media hasn't gone away at all.
Well, I think that a lot of Trump supporters don't associate Trump with the establishment quite yet.
Well, he's not, though. And that's a huge problem with the way in which the Democrats and all of these staffers at the White House are treating him. Every story that comes out talking about how Trump doesn't know where the light switch is not a story where you read it and you go, oh, what a dumbass. It's a story where people are reading it and going, yep, another example of the establishment trying to sabotage him and make him look stupid. Because that is probably what is actually happening there, where the staffers just don't tell him shit because they just want to fuck him over. They don't like him for good reason, and so they make him look dumb for good reason. But that doesn't work because people don't like the government. Right. It's not like you've got a hero and a villain in this story. It's just it's a villainous institution and a villainous individual, and they're just fighting with each other.
Well, speaking of villains, a lot has been said. The word fascist is thrown around a lot, and this word has been thrown around back in the Bush days. George Bush got called a fascist a lot.
Christian fascist, yep.
Yeah, this isn't anything new, right?
No.
But the fact that you have neo-Nazi like Steve Bannon, white nationalist like Steve Bannon, the Ku Klux Klan endorsing the Donald Trump, every single fucking racist in America voted for Donald Trump, and every single neo-Nazi voted for Donald Trump.
Probably.
I'm not saying that there aren't racists within the Democratic Party ranks, but my point is that while fascists in America supported Donald Trump, is Donald Trump himself, is this movement within the Republican Party fascist?
The movement within the Republican Party, you mean like Trump and his gang of idiots or whatever?
Cohorts, yes.
Yeah, his horde.
Yeah. Are they fascist?
I don't think so. I certainly do. Okay. I mean, in the case of Bannon, I think in his case, there's an argument to be made there because of certain things he's written and said, mainly in the past. You could have made the exact same arguments, though, on the basis of when Ron Paul was running. When he was running for the Republican candidacy, a lot of the shit that he signed off on and wrote in like the 1990s for his weird newspaper was like super fucking racist and very much like segregation's great and black people should be kicked out of the country and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but Ron Paul didn't matter so much because he didn't stand a hope in hell of even winning the nomination.
My point is that, okay, fine, but it doesn't make a difference the amount of power a person has. That's not what makes someone a fascist. And I think that is, firstly, one of the major problems a lot of people have with this. When George Bush gets into power, people were calling him a fascist, not because of any actual political reason, but because he had too much power centralized in a person who doesn't deserve that much power. His very existence in that position is an abuse of power,
right?
And therefore smacks of fascism, essentially. And in the case of Trump, I think there's a similar sort of attitude being applied to him, that he is so unqualified for the position, it must be like a breach of democracy in some kind of fundamental, visceral way.
Yeah.
So in the case of Trump, I don't think he's a fascist. Bannon might be or might have been in some way.
Well, the people all around, like everyone at Breitbart, like fucking Milo, that scumbag piece of shit.
I don't think he's a fascist either.
He's an
asshole.
There's pictures of him wearing like Nazi iron crosses and like he's delved into that shit for sure. Mm-hmm. And even if, I mean, whether or not someone self-identifies as a neo-Nazi, for me, if someone is forced into the position where they, like Richard Spencer, that piece of shit, for example, if someone has to answer the question whether or not they are a neo-Nazi, it's almost a foregone conclusion that why would you even ask that question to someone if they weren't all obviously already a fucking equivalent to a neo-Nazi, if not but in name, right? All of this shit about misogyny and racism.
I mean, a lot of the same things were said about like left-wing people as far as like McCarthyism goes and communism. If you end up in front of the House of Un-American Activities being asked if you're a communist, then obviously you are, because why else would you be asked that question? It's not good enough just to say that a lot of people are getting painted with the fascist brush. And therefore, don't get me wrong, they're fucking horrible people. This isn't quite the problem. That's not where I'm disagreeing with you at all. I don't like Milo. I don't like Bannon. I don't like Trump.
I'm not insinuating that.
But I mean, I don't just not like them. The question is
if they're a fascist or not.
I would even go further than that and say just like, I don't think they're just a regular conservative either. Like just some right-wing, mouthpiece. They are representative of really, really awful politics, some of which I think will be used and are being used by fascists, like actual fascists, as far as I'm concerned, as ideological fodder. Yeah. This guy wrote this article or said these things, and they'll quote it because it fucking fits perfectly with what their kind of bent is.
And it legitimizes them.
Well, yeah, but that's just the fucking world we live in these days, man. Bad politics are getting legitimized all over the place. There's, because of sort of the political chaos in the world right now, where there are these crises and no natural solution coming directly out of capitalist politics.
Yeah.
or like normal, everyday liberal conservative back and forth politics.
Yeah, there's just this backlash. Like in Europe, you have the backlash against refugees, and there are very few governments there that are taking a admirable stance towards that. I mean, I think Canada might be. I mean,
we've closed our borders too, unofficially.
We only have one.
No, but we were. I don't know if you remember when Trump originally closed the border, we graciously offered to let in as many Syrians as wanted to come to Canada instead. As it turned out, we had already stopped our quota at 100 people, and that number had been filled already. So it was like an empty offer, essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've already taken quite a few refugees.
We just haven't met our promises at all.
Right.
That's all. I mean, yes, we have taken quite a few, but the relatively meager number that we've offered to, like the quotas we've set, haven't been met and won't be at any point, because they're basically just being scaled back quietly, and then just sort of being openly touted as better than America, which is, yeah, but
skinny kid at fat camp.
Yeah, one person is better than no one, I guess. I don't know.
Okay,
well, is Trump or is Bannon or any of these other guys a fascist? I mean, this is the biggest fucking question that's been going on right now.
That begs the very obvious question of what is fascism? No.
Yeah, it is. First and foremost, it's an insult.
An insult?
Yeah, when your dad won't lend you his car, he's a fascist.
Fascist.
That's the classic one, right? Yeah, I mean, well, to be fair, it is an insult. I mean, people called Stephen Harper a fascist. Like you said, George Bush, usually right-wing politicians, but even liberal ones or social democratic ones, anybody is going to be called by someone, a fascist,
Yeah, but I mean, that's precisely why I've posed the question, what actually is fascism? Because the word is overused perhaps more than any other in the political sphere. I mean, just because a government is very repressive and not democratic doesn't necessarily mean it's fascist, right? And that's usually where the term is used, where they're being, authoritarian or whatever, therefore they're a fascist. But there have been plenty, dozens, hundreds maybe, of authoritarian regimes that you couldn't really consider to be fascist in name and by ideology. And so a regime like Trump's can exhibit a lot of the qualities of fascism and not quite be up to par. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, where do you draw the line? Because the actual definition of fascism, like the fascism that occurred in the 1930s and 40s in Germany, Italy, is so specific that I wonder if could that actually ever happen in the same way again? Can we actually use the term fascism again in history in an accurate way? Or are we always just going to be making these callbacks to authoritarian regimes? I mean, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes, right? So how specific do we really need to be before we actually find, like Steve Bannon is the closest to an actual fascist in the government in America right now. And for him, I'd say it's pretty fucking close.
I would say, for him at least, I think he would be perfectly comfortable in an actual fascist government.
Yeah.
Which might sound a bit odd when I say he's not a fascist, and I don't think Trump is either. I don't think there's anything he's said that is really incompatible with it, ultimately. There's no, red line that he wouldn't cross, or, they're a bit too racist, or they want to do this or that or the other, and I'm not interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah.
His whole ideological vision, I think, fits perfectly well with it.
Compatible, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. A lot of people look at sort of a compatibility, the compatibility of a particular political view with fascism, and then say, there's no bit sticking out, so it's fascism. There you go.
Yeah, well, I mean, actual fascism historically is sort of a reaction to a workers' movement, usually, right?
Sometimes. I mean, it's not just a reaction. Okay, so the historical stuff, right? Germany, Italy, Spain, Austria as well, Romania eventually, but basically Germany, Italy, Spain, right? Or even just Germany, if we want to be really specific. The fascist movement in those countries Well, firstly, it was a political party. It was explicitly fascist in all those cases. Now, that's not necessarily something we might see today. A lot of actual people I would say are actually fascists are kind of hem and haw on like, well, am I a fascist? Well, I don't really care. Those labels, blah, blah, blah. But at the very least, you could say if someone is calling themselves a fascist, that's not really something you can lie about, really.
Yeah.
If you're that far down the road, then we now know, right?
Yeah, but the people like Steve Bannon would never self-identify as a fascist.
And so I don't think that's necessarily a strict thing that we need to carry on into the modern question of fascism today. I don't think fascism today is going to be nearly that explicit.
Well, like they said, when fascism comes to America, it will be draped in the American flag.
Well, yeah, but that's true of all American politics. When socialism comes to America, it'll probably be draped in an American flag, too.
I like that you said when.
Yeah. Anyway, but there's other more significant things. It was a mass movement of the middle class, of the petty bourgeoisie in Germany, forming a party that was in the context of revolutionary movements, in the context of a very strong and scary working class, reacting to that scary working class and revolutionary movements, sought a third way, quote unquote, between capitalism and socialism, trying to sort of square the circle, and in doing so, deciding to destroy the working class movement. Get into power to do that, obviously, because that's the best way to destroy the working class, is through a position of power. And once they were there, they basically atomized the working class in all those countries, killed as many people as they had to do that. And then in each and every case, I mean, while they all started off as these sort of middle of the road, and sometimes they would adopt socialist rhetoric or socialist policies, the closer and closer they get to political power, the more and more of the left-wing stuff, quote unquote, gets thrown away. And then once they're in power, it's, well, capitalism's fine, or capitalism is perfectly compatible with the, German Workers' Party, blah, blah, blah. And therefore, we're fine. So capitalism will just keep making its money, and workers will just do what they're told.
Yeah, extreme right-wing movements are always draped in left-wing rhetoric at first.
Yeah, but the major point, I think, of the fascist movements of the past particularly is their mass character. These are not just a handful of people waving flags, and they were all mass movements, and they were all reacting to strong working-class movements in Europe. In the case of the United States, neither of those things are true. There isn't a strong working class that had recently threatened American capitalism, and there was no mass movement behind Trump that was specifically identifying itself as a fascist movement. Much of it was, as is always pointed out, yes, it was relatively left-wing, a lot of the things he was talking about.
Left-wing?
Yeah, well, jobs, employment,
right.
Better lives for regular
issues.
People, that kind of stuff. Yeah, and so on the basis of that, you could say, like, well, he's sort of pandering to people like fascist leaders in the past have. The problem in the case of the United States is, the problem for fascists, and this is really good for us, the problem for fascists in most of the world today is that the working class is just too large relative to the rest of the population now. In the 1930s and earlier even, there were large portions of the population that were middle class and relatively economically independent and had the time and interest to take on fascist ideas in a very serious way themselves. These days, the middle class really, like the petty bourgeoisie, the independent business owners, are weak and have very little power in society. And the working class is just the vast majority of America now. And because of that, I don't think that the politics of fascism are ever really going to be able to get a foothold in America again. That doesn't mean there could be new kinds of reactionary politics. And
perhaps worse than fascism.
Well, that's hard to imagine, but I mean, you could say that in the 1920s about like World War I.
Yeah.
No way
Possibly
another war will be worse than that. That was as bad as they could ever get. Yeah, that's fair. It could be worse, but I think that when it comes to like the job of people interested in these sorts of things, one of the worst things that leftists did in the 1930s was treat fascism like it was the stuff that came before, essentially.
What do you mean?
Well, like it's a reactionary movement, or it's not even. Quite a few people were completely enamored with it as like, this is the solution. You know, the communist parties, the Soviet Union, and all that stuff. Yep, they're crap. Fascism has something to it that attracted a certain segment of the population. And even the people who were against it just sort of treated it as another reactionary political party, essentially.
Okay, but if we're talking about the new sort of authoritarian sweep within the Republican Party, the newfound attractiveness for a lot of people with alt-right neo-Nazi ideas, misogyny, racism, for me, if it fucking walks like a fascist, if it talks like a fascist, if it smells like a fascist, it's a fucking fascist. You know, the trend towards authoritarianism, the don't criticize our leader, the misogyny, the racism, all of it. I mean, it is too similar to fascism for me to not least make a comparison.
I think it's worth the comparison, but I mean, I think it was worth the comparison with Bush or Stephen Harper.
Yeah, but it's so much worse under Trump.
Yeah. But it'll be so much worse
people
under
like
the next one, too. He's not going to be the last president of the United States, although it might feel like that now. There will be others. Just this was the same feeling people had when Bush got in. Well, more the second time, but it was just the sense of like dread and awfulness, and like there is not going to be a future now. And while things will get worse, and there will be attacks on the working class, and there will be right-wing misogynist policies being implemented, and fucking awful things probably going on every week for the next 4 years. That was the good news is people are fucking very aware of this now.
Yeah.
Like the illusion is sort of gone. This is not a political system or a leader that deserves our respect, and therefore people feel a lot more willing to fight against it, which is very different from what a fascist causes in society when they get into power. It's the exact opposite when actual fascists rise to power. There's a stifling of protest. There's a stifling of disgust for the government. People abandon the streets, and everyone seems to love everything they do. In the case of Trump, it's hard to find people who like his policies other than the people he's hired.
That's not true. He still has a 40% approval rating.
Yeah.
You know, there are massive swaths of the Republican Party that are totally in favor of what he's doing. In fact, I wonder why they even engage in opinion polling in America at all, because it's always this 45 believe this and 55% believe that.
Yeah, well, I would argue, and I think the last year proves, you should just fucking ignore the polls.
Yeah.
As you say, yes, they're always the same, because the kind of question they tend to ask is the vague bullshit of basically what they're asking is, as a Republican, are you still loyal to the Republican Party? As a Democrat, are you still loyal to the Democratic Party?
Right.
And so you're going to just get these sort of people who say things that, yeah, they agree. But I think a better example is in the streets, in the case of protests, in the case of the people who showed up for his nomination versus the people who, or confirmation, versus the people who showed up to protest the next day. Never minding the fact that, I mean, I don't think everyone who showed up for the confirmation was there because they liked him. I'm sure there were plenty of people there just to see it.
Well, they were all white.
Yeah, but hell, if I was living in D.C., I would have gone.
Just to see it.
Yeah. You fucking kidding me? I would have hated him, but I mean, I saw people in the crowds that were like, we're not there because they liked the president. But, you know, what I'm saying is that even there you have a minority relative to the protests the next day. We have, in the case of the United States, a large portion of the population that absolutely fucking despises the president.
Yeah.
And are willing to act because of that.
I mean, that's the situation on the ground, but from the perspective of the actual American administration right now, you do have people like Sean Spicer and all of his cronies and mouthpieces or whatever demanding absolute lockstep loyalty, saying that he will not be questioned. His authority is supreme, right?
And, well,
that I'm just saying it's a fascist attitude. I
mean, that's not necessarily fascist. The desire to have the media do what you want goes back to like the earliest days of parliamentary politics. Censorship of the media is like one day younger than the existence of the media. You know, like, this is not new. Not
yeah,
even
but they're
20th century.
not nuanced about it. They're
So what? They're incompetent, but
demanding loyalty.
Yeah, they do, because that's what they think will work. My point isn't so much that they're not going to act like fucking monsters. It's that they don't have the actual class levers in society to do what fascists do. They're going to tell people, they're going to demand loyalty from people. And the only question, and I think this gets into something that worries me a lot more than the fascist character of some of these people, like the fascistic character of these people. And the part that really does worry me is what the media does in response. You know, demanding loyalty. A fucking guy on the street corner can demand your loyalty. It doesn't matter if he's just some crackpot. The question isn't, are they being unnuanced in their bullshit? It's who is going to fucking be cowed by that.
Right.
Does the media have enough of a backbone to stand up to the president?
CNN seems to be.
Well, that's good, and they are doing a decent job, but even there...
I never thought I would live in a world where I would say that CNN was doing a decent job.
Well, I never thought I'd live in a world where Alex Jones would be telling people that, Russia's hacking of the American election is a conspiracy theory with no evidence. But what I'm saying is, like, we're looking at a world in which the media has a fucking super important role to play right now. And they are just totally incapable of it, I think. The left...
In what sense? They're criticizing Trump at every turn.
Yeah, they are, sort of. They're getting in the proper sound... They're still playing sound bites, basically. They're doing that whole game. They're not analyzing anything. They're not investigating anything. They are responding to the stupidity of the administration. And because of that, the administration is completely on the offensive. The administration has the initiative at every turn. The media is responding to the executive orders of the president. They're responding to the stupid thing so-and-so says, or whatever. They're not doing anything themselves. They're not finding out, where did these people come from? Is Steve Bannon a fascist? What about the backgrounds of these people? Where did these policies come from? Where's his money coming from? What kind of deals is he making with the rest of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party? All that stuff is we're gonna probably find out about that years from now. Like usually like when we found out how Obamacare was actually decided on.
Right.
Like as it turned out, it really wasn't. It was just basically an agreement that was arrived at pretty much the day after he was elected. And then the rest of it was just showmanship. So that's what the media needs to be doing. I mean, I love that they're sort of haranguing him at every opportunity. It's fun. But particularly even if they're sort of fascist or kind of reactionary, that's nowhere near good enough. I mean, to be fair, if this was a fascist government, the advice would not be to vote for the Democrats or to make fun of him in the media. It would be, if there's a fascist government, the argument is arm the working class to overthrow it. Yeah. And if you can't do that, and if you can't say that, if that's really not what you want to do, then do you really think it's fascist, or is ultimately that just another
insult?
An insult or a alternative fact. They're fascists, but not really, just sort of.
Okay. Well, on that topic, I have a picture here from the Holocaust Memorial Museum in the United States about the early warning signs of fascism.
Yeah.
And we've been discussing this a little bit already. So why don't we just go through these bullet points bit by bit? We'll see how fascist the Trump administration is or isn't, okay? So the first one is, of course, powerful and continuing nationalism. Make America great again. America's the best. America's great. America's awesome.
What was it he said? America only, America always, America first, something like that? Like,
the nationalism is very obvious and pandered to within Trump.
I mean, honestly, when we're talking about nationalism and in the United States, his is, once again, I think it's more crass than exceptional. Like, I don't think he's more nationalistic so much as he's just really fucking obvious. He's the guy who, would be fucking painting his, stomach the American flag and running around on July 4th.
Yeah, I mean, if
that kind of nationalism.
America has always been very nationalistic, and every president from, Washington to Obama was equally nationalistic, or at least said America is great as many times. But the thing with Trump and his administration, his movement, the things that he says, is that there is I think a more heavy emphasis on America first than, say, the easy comparison is Obama, that was all about, bilateralism and diplomacy and getting everyone to sit around at a table and come to a sort of consensus. There wasn't this sort of chest bumping, belching nationalism like Trump has.
Belching nationalism. I think that's a good summary for it.
I think so too. Yeah.
I would just say though, I think in both cases, both in the belching nationalism and in the backroom nationalism, it still was America first. I mean, even if he didn't believe it, his argument actually was America is best served if we don't act like assholes. Basically.
That was smart.
And he might be right. I don't really care at a certain point. I'm not really interested in the minutia of the best policies for imperialism. How do we get what we want without anyone noticing?
Or thinking we're
how do we do it and people think that we're still nice? I mean, that's sort of the democratic kind of mindset, or the liberal one, particularly here in Canada, where we're very good at that relative to the United States, and in fact relative to most other countries. We're very, very good at putting ourselves first and fucking over other countries and coming out smelling like roses.
Yeah.
Hey, we're just nice. Oh, we're boring, we're nice, we're pleasant, and we also have mining companies in South America that kill people. But we're really nice about it.
And we helped to overthrow the democratically elected government in Haiti in 2004.
But we're, but Canadians, come on.
We're not as bad as the Yankees.
We're just a bunch of goofballs. We're just pleasant.
We just say sorry too much.
Yeah, that's our problem. We're just too polite.
Okay, so let's move on to the next early warning signs of fascism. Disdain for human rights.
Yep.
I want to say my first thought, of course, is Guantanamo.
Although that's been around for a long time, so it's not a really good example.
Yeah, and Obama didn't close it. But Trump seems quite fond of Guantanamo, and seems to be interested in putting more people there. But no, I mean, not just that, but Trump displayed a sort of a fetish towards torture and what they call enhanced interrogation techniques during the campaign. He said he wants to bring back waterboarding and then some. He encouraged violence at his rallies. He doesn't seem to give two shits or a fuck about human rights, and seems to openly worship the violation of human rights to attack the bad guys. So that's that.
I do agree with that one.
I think it's a check mark, and I think actually the nationalism was also a check mark.
Oh, I think they both were. I mean, once again, my caveat for this one is really the same as the last, where it's like, well, the disdain for human rights is a long-standing tradition.
When did America actually give two shits or a fuck about human rights?
Well, like I said, Guantanamo Bay has been open for a long time, and of course, the president who sort of made drone strikes a branch of government was the previous one, who was the nice guy. Well, okay. Here's the thing, though. I mean, the infringements upon human rights goes back decades. I mean, you just look at Trail of Tears.
Trail of Tears. Or I was thinking something that happened a lot later than
Japanese
that.
internment camps.
Actually, I was thinking.
Oh, wait, no, slavery.
Oh, hold on. No, actually, it was Salvador Allende, Chile, the first September 11th. And the reason I bring up that example was because the United States has historically not really given a shit about human rights outside of their borders, but for at least the white population in the United States cared about human rights for them. So as long as, their people, quote unquote, are have their human rights respected, that seems to be all that's important. But I think in the case of Trump, there's, the use of, I don't think Trump would really care about the use of torture against an American citizen, for example, whereas other presidents maybe would have actually objected to that. So
he believes in equal rights. That's what you're saying.
Fuck. Jesus Christ.
Hey, we gotta balance out somewhere, right? No, I know what you mean. Yeah, that is the exceptional part when it comes to Trump, is the disdain for human rights, in the sense that not even so much in what he's done, but in his total disinterest in it.
Yeah.
Like, that even the worst president, human rights was always a principle.
Yeah.
No matter how bad we are, at least for any one of them, it was, well, yeah, we are doing something wrong. It might be the right thing to do. Interning Japanese people during World War II is the right thing to do because there's a war on and they might be spies. And there's at least, that's the argument. They never said, fuck it, who cares, put whoever you want in prison.
Yeah.
It was this very specific thing. And while, racism and bigotry and that kind of thing have existed pretty much since the beginning, there was always the conceit that there's something worth striving for in the American Republic. Like, there's something to this that is worth all of the war crimes at the end of the day. And I think in many cases they were completely wrong about that, but at least you had something to say about, like, the quality of life or freedom in America.
And Trump doesn't give two shits about that.
I didn't fucking care at all.
Okay, so third point on the early warning signs of fascism is identification of enemies as a unifying cause, which I think is rampant within the Trump administration, in terms of the radical Islamic extremists and the Mexicans, the immigrants pouring over our borders, that they're victimizing certain groups and throwing people under the bus, as that they're the problem, not us good white working people. It's those immigrants,
or capitalism or whatever.
Yeah.
No, honestly, this one I'm going to disagree with more than the previous ones. I think by far Bush and several other previous American presidents identified the other more severely than Trump has.
Fucking bullshit. Trump's whole campaign was based on anti-immigration.
Yeah.
It was based on anti-Islam.
And jobs. And ending NAFTA. But that sort of all was sort of part of the same thing.
Yeah, but the solutions that he proposed to those economic problems were the immigrants. We need to stop immigrants from coming into the country. Those people are the problem.
Yeah, but not once did he suggest... Well, actually, he did a couple times. But relative to George Bush and even Obama, his solutions to these problems were closing the border in both cases, both in the case of radical Islam and in the case of Mexicans. He was never nearly as in favor of foreign wars as other presidents have been.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a rebuke of this point.
I think it is, because at the end of the day, that's what actually is. I think wars are way worse for people than simply closing the border. If he were to fucking somehow close that whole fucking country off from the rest of the world, just like he wants to, it wouldn't change a damn thing.
What are you talking about?
It wouldn't make people more united against other... Like, wars unite in a way that closing a border just won't.
Yeah, but that doesn't refute the fact that he's victimizing people. He's saying immigrants are the problem, foreigners are the problem, Muslims are the problem. The fact that the third warning sign is identification of enemies as a unifying cause, he's getting the whole Republican base rallied around the hatred of immigrants and those other people, those enemies, those Islamists. That is a check mark on the checklist.
He didn't need to rally anyone. There was no work there was no fucking like laying of arguments down for particularly for the Republican Party. This is a fucking long-standing issue, however you want to put it. The illegals or whatever have been a fucking problem for the Republicans forever.
But that says more about the fascistic character of the Republican Party than it says about the non-quote-unquote fascistic characters of Trump. The fact that there are already these fascist tendencies within the Republican Party, and Trump was playing those up and highlighting them.
I think that's a racist. I mean, sorry, not you.
It's just racism, you mean?
I think, yes, it's run-of-the-mill racism. I don't disagree with, I guess, the fact that it does unite some people. But in the case of Trump, he lost the popular vote. He didn't actually unite people around this issue. And B, the demographics that voted for him didn't vote remarkably different than other more regular candidates. What we had in the United States is a population that for the most part ended up voting, with a few very, very particular exceptions, they ended up voting for the parties they always vote for anyway.
Yeah, but I don't think that...
And I don't think he's unifying the country around the issue of banning immigrants.
No, he's not unifying the country at all, but he's unifying, or he's rallying his party, his supporters around this belief.
But what I'm saying is he was able to do that anyway. He could have said nothing and the Republicans would have still voted for him. He's a fucking massive sexist, bigamist douchebag, and the right-wing Christian conservatives still supported him. Well, how is that possible? How is it possible he's able to unite people when his policies and statements and actions are completely contrary to their own stated beliefs? It's because it's not the issue. The reason why the conservative religious movement supports the Republican Party is because they've fucking basically been tricked into it, I think.
Yeah, but what does this have anything to do with whether or not the Donald Trump movement is a fascist one or not?
Well, it has to do with the sincerity of the principles that you're listing off here. I think Trump's desire to build that wall is A, incredibly confused, B, it's not really clear who actually thinks he's actually going to do that. Some people, even his own supporters, talk about the wall as if it's just a hypothetical thing that'll never actually happen. And so in the case of are his policies a unifying war or conflict against another force? I really don't think so.
Yeah, but that's not the question at hand. The question is whether or not identification of enemies as a unifying cause.
Well, okay, fine, but I guess I see that statement as having an impact on the society in which that cause is proffered.
Yeah, but he's in power now, and his policies do have an actual effect on American society.
Yeah, because he's president, not because he's a fascist. I mean,
they can both be true.
Well, maybe. That's obviously what we're arguing about.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is that I don't think that the offer of that enemy actually unified people behind him as a fascist demagogue.
Okay, well, whether or not someone is a fascist and whether or not someone actually has a successful fascist movement are two different things. I mean...
Well, he's president. You can't get much more successful than that.
Well, okay, precisely. So the fact that the president and the people around him are scapegoating minorities and, Muslims and Mexicans...
Yep.
Is a fascist trait.
Sort of. I mean, once again, I'd say it's the sort of thing a fascist would and do. I don't think that he has a movement behind him that enemy has actually unified. Because in the case of classical fascist governments, what made them so dangerous, what made them so deadly, ultimately, was that they weren't contentious. They did unify people.
Right.
They brought people into this like monolithic state system and everyone was involved in it, and there was no, as Mussolini says, everything in the state, nothing outside the state, that kind of thing. Like, it's all part of this government. And in the case of Trump, I mean, yeah, he can be throwing out racist bullshit, but that to me is like one of the most fundamental features of an actual fascist government or a fascist party or a fascist movement, is that it is appealing to some segment of society.
Yeah, well, they were appealing enough to win the presidency, and just because it's appealing or not doesn't make it fascist or not. I mean, you can if you have one, two different parties in two different circumstances saying exactly the same thing, just because one succeeds and the other fails doesn't make them one not fascist and not the other, right? The fact that the Trump administration is saying things that Nazi Germany could have and did say about the Jews, is itself fascistic. Whether or not that actually resonates with the American public is a totally different question.
I don't think it is. I think that's the nub of the problem. Because to me, fascism is not simply a question of tone or arguments or ideas. It's a class question.
Right.
And so a fascist movement is not simply one that is, five assholes who call themselves Nazis and walk around with armbands and patches and bullshit. Those are fuckers, and they should be treated as such, certainly.
Yeah.
But an actual, if we're talking about the serious threat of fascism, it is on the basis of that kind of class foundation. And Trump just did not and does not have a distinct and independent class force in society that he can implement fascist policies through.
Well, that rebukes whether or not if we assume Donald Trump and his movement is fascist, then that would stifle their efforts at implementing those policies. But that doesn't question whether or not those things that they are saying are or are not fascistic.
No, this is where I as I said before, I think they're awful. And what's really creepy about all of this to me, well, disappointing, sad, I don't know. What's a word for a disturbing lack of surprise? But whatever that word is, that all of these policies, fascistic or just right-wing or racist or, hell, fuck it, let's just say it's racist. Let's say he's just a racist asshole. He's having no problem putting forward his racism through the normal channels of government. He's using the political power that he has as president. He doesn't have, at this point, he doesn't have any need for the kind of mass movement I'm talking about.
Right.
However, without it, the real danger of fascism is still not present. He is a president of the United States who is an idiot and a monster and a bigamist and, fuck it, go into synonyms.com. You fucking can just read it all off.
Yeah.
He's awful, but that's it. He's an awful president.
Okay, well, fine. Fourth point is supremacy of the military.
Yep. Oh, that one I think is completely fucking true.
Check mark.
Oh yeah.
He has more ex-generals in his cabinet than I think any other post-war president. He is blindly and fervently in support of the military and America strong. Great.
Yep.
There's barely any discussion on that point. I mean, clearly he...
No, I don't think so. I mean, the only thing I'd say is just that, that's a fairly common feature of most governments or most American presidents.
Yeah.
And it is, I don't think it's his fault so much as it's been the trend, it seems, in recent history where...
If you're against the military, you're un-American.
Well, not just that. That would be bad enough. But the bigger problem is that more and more American politicians start their career in the military. To be a military man, or as is occasionally the case, woman, is a foundation for a political career.
Yeah.
That is a natural progression in your, goals in life.
Yeah.
You get a job in the military, you rise up to the ranks to a respectable post, and then you use that as leverage to now take part in politics. That seems to me, that's a disturbing feature of the American political system. I mean, John McCain was a good example of this, of a guy whose only real credentials before he became a politician was the fact that he was a soldier.
Right.
And that's not that uncommon. I mean, that was a major feature of why he ran for office. Like what he was saying, you can trust me. I will make a good president because I've been a soldier.
On the other hand, you have people like George Bush and Trump who are inconspicuously absent from the military.
Well, John Kerry was also an example of a military man that people tended to forget about. But even George Bush,
he was a Democrat.
Yeah, because he was, a Democrat, and therefore it doesn't count for some reason.
Therefore weak.
Yeah, and even in George Bush's case, it the negative disturbed me too. The fact that the Democrats played up the fact that he wasn't a real soldier,
right,
is not an actual argument. It's not a point in their favor to say that. It's basically just playing into the same pro-military, it's always good and soldiers should run the country kind of attitude.
Yeah, well, as Gore Vidal said, the America has one political party with two right wings.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, American military prominence is fucking the most obvious thing.
You can't be president without that. And so number 5 is maybe a little bit more poignant to Trump: rampant sexism. Dare I even quote him?
Quote him on. Well, actually, I don't know if you could. I can't think of a single quote I could quote him on that wouldn't be something disgusting. Actually, it's all pretty awful stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the fact that he's, twice divorced and seems to sexually fetishize his own daughter, grab him by the pussy,
etc., etc. I don't even.
I mean, this is just a moot point.
He's pretty bad. But what is interesting, I guess, in this case, not even really so much a disagreement on that point, but what's interesting is that the Christian conservative right wing doesn't seem to give two shits about this. They're like just blithely supporting him as God's man in the Oval Office, and that's it. And I'm not really that surprised, but it's just kind of amusing, I guess, on that point, where these people who will go on and on and on about immorality in society, and will talk about Bill Clinton still, will just say, he's a man of principle, that Trump.
Well, it's because he's a Republican and not a Democrat, and he's on their side, and, Clinton wasn't.
A lot of this stuff, I mean, to be fair, a lot of the questions about Trump kind of evaporate in the context of the two-party system. How much of any of this matters when he was the Republican candidate and was going to get 40% of the vote no matter what? He could have been a fucking vegetable. Yeah,
well, and that's what I mean when I said a while back about the polls in America are always 45-55. Yeah. The party loyalty is just astounding. Okay, so, I mean, we basically don't even need to talk about the sexism. That is
that's
offensively obvious. Controlled mass media is the next one, and that's something that I think that the Trump administration does exhibit because of their heavy-handedness.
They try to.
Yeah, well, I mean, just how Sean Spicer angrily confronts reporters, how Donald Trump himself personally vilified the media during his campaign. Mm-hmm. He would point over to the media and say, look at those scumbags over there, and people would boo them. The disdain towards the media and facts in general, not just the media, but just truth and
reality.
Scientific evidence is vilified.
A strangely postmodernist view on reality. Yeah. But I think in this example, Trump actually fails this one. I don't think this is a check mark at all. As far as controlling the media goes, Trump is worse at that than previous presidents.
Okay, but I think here I think we're looking at this in two different perspectives, because you're saying, is the Trump movement a fascist movement in terms of what are the actual effects of their policies, whereas I'm kind of looking at it towards what does the Trump movement actually want to do, the behaviors that they're exhibiting, the sort of tendencies that they have, are they fascistic in that sense, not whether or not they're actually successful in that, because insofar as has Trump been good at dealing with the media? Obviously no, it's been a train wreck, but the fact that they very blatantly want to lie to the media and want to control them and want to demand lockstep sort of authority and loyalty towards the administration, they are absolutely fascistic in that sense, where that's what they want. Whether or not they're actually good at that is another question.
I think the previous Obama administration was good at getting the media to do what he wanted it to do. I think he was not just good at it; he wanted to control the media. He wanted it to tell. It wanted the stories that administration wanted to have that day, and he got it for the most part. If we're talking about what the administration of Trump wants, yeah, they want to control the media. But that was true of pretty much every president ever. And in the case of previous presidents, some of them were really, really good at it. And some of them even understood how the media worked and just used that to just sort of play them like puppets. In the case of Trump, once again, a lot of this comes down to the old, like where we were starting this conversation on, is Trump just sort of peeling back the lies? Is this just the exposure of what always was? Trump's just not good at manipulating the media,
right?
And on that point, I mean, like I said, I don't think that the current government really hits this checkbox, I guess.
But the American political system does.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem with a lot of these sorts of things, is that a lot of this stuff is in the implication, like, controlling the media. We know what that means. Like, we know what that implies, right? It implies a lack of clarity, a lack of transparency in what the government does. It implies that the populace is being lied to. It implies that the populace is being deceived and that their opinions are being manipulated by institutions that they don't agree with or understand. But that has been the case for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think that if you compare Trump's sort of flaccid attempts at stifling the media in their coverage of him, couldn't really hold a candle up to the way that Erdogan and Turkey has actually persecuted media outlets and censored them actively. Maybe when or if the Trump administration starts actively censoring media outlets is when we could check off that box. But for now, I think we can agree that they want to control the mass media, but at this point they aren't and cannot.
Flaccid, yeah.
Flaccid. It's pronounced flaccid, Mac. Next point, obsession with national security. I think this is an obvious check mark. The border wall, yeah. the Muslim ban. We need to figure out what the hell is going on before blah, 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 blah. This is an obvious frequent theme of the Trump campaign and continuing campaign into the office, the Trump administration. Yeah, they are absolutely obsessed with national security.
Yep, and incompetently so, but still. Although I would say this list was obviously created before 2001.
Yeah.
I mean, that... It has been a different era since then, and while that's not really an excuse for anyone, it's just that no matter who you were, you had to give props to security and protecting the borders or keeping out bad guys or whatever, fucking, random screenings, et cetera, et cetera. It's been so fucking... It's basically a joke at this point, which also kind of feeds back into the whole media thing, where I think a lot of people are well aware that it doesn't really work very well. Like, the whole keeping America safe is kind of more just a show than it is an actual goal.
Okay, so next one is religion and government intertwined, which is absolutely a hallmark of the Trump administration, not because Trump is himself religious, but because, perhaps exclusively because of the nomination of Jeff Sessions, a certifiable piece of human garbage, to the Attorney General, someone that has himself questioned whether or not atheists and non-religious people are suitable to hold public office, almost ironically, with Trump being president.
Well, he's not an atheist. He's just a businessman.
Yeah, he'll
He's
play
a
any
capitalist.
card. Yeah, so I think that Trump is himself not religious and not beholden to those ideas, but he has bent over backwards for them. He is perfectly comfortable with taking issue with Roe versus Wade and the right for women to have abortions, women's rights in general. Just the fact that he would appoint someone like that fucking man to Attorney General speaks volumes.
Yeah, although, man, of all the things, I think America deserves an exception for this one. Because religion and politics there is so fucked up.
They are deeply intertwined.
Yeah, although, I mean, okay, if you were to pick a government, an administration, a presidency that you would identify as the religious one, which one would it be?
The Republicans?
No, I mean, which president?
Yeah, they all talk about God and shit. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. You could pick Bush, even though that doesn't make much sense.
Okay, so this is an automatic check mark, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, so next one is corporate power protected. Check mark?
Another automatic check mark.
Yeah.
I don't know. Corporate power protected. Yeah, this is one that really isn't at all unique to fascism. Really, it's more of just like I don't forget to do what we've always been doing anyway, kind of.
Because fascism uses capitalism, and capitalism is already there. So.
Well, a lot of this is. I mean, that one particularly seems more from a liberal bent. Like, fascism is the corporate power, capitalism run amok. Proper liberal democracy is capitalism that is respectable and agreeable and pleasant.
Right.
So, I mean, I think the contradictions of the way our economy works result in it running amok. So that's just inevitable.
Okay, next one is labor power suppressed, which in America is a weird check to give because there isn't much labor power.
Well, this one I wouldn't give them the check.
Well, there was the case where the union boss of when Trump was talking about the air conditioning units that were being moved to Mexico or whatever.
Yeah.
Or, I can't even remember, but the union boss called out Trump on Twitter, and then he was, sort of vilified by his supporters, and people made death threats against him and his family. So there's been at least one case of labor power being singled out.
Yeah, president of a union, not a very good union, being sort of attacked. Yeah, that's true. Although I would point out, like, the problem in this one is in many ways kind of ironic. The labor movement has not been a particularly decisive foe of the president.
No,
they haven't at any particular point. So yeah, if a particular president of a union happens to go on Twitter, maybe they'll get death threats. Maybe the president will respond to that. But otherwise, they're ignored, and in some cases even promoted by Trump.
Well, okay.
Where it's, American workers in factories and good jobs and good
except
pay.
You have the president or the secretary of labor is the CEO of Carl's Jr. And, not only is he a notorious sexist and wife beater, but he is against workers' rights. He doesn't believe in a minimum wage. He doesn't believe in increasing the minimum wage. He favors automation and hiring robots over people. He, in fact, there was a survey at I think it was Carl's Jr. or a series of other, fast food chains that he owns, that 80% of people that were polled said that they were forced to come to work and serve food while they were sick. So, we have a Secretary of Labor that clearly doesn't care about workers' rights and doesn't care about labor standards and doesn't care about the minimum wage. Yep. So I think that we can make a check mark on this about labor power being suppressed just by the fact of the previous behavior of his labor secretary pick.
I don't know, man. That seems pretty just generic to me.
A lot of fascism is just generic, Mac.
Well, it's not supposed to be. That's the whole point.
Well, maybe America has always been a little bit more fascist than we want to admit.
Come on. I'm not an anarchist.
I'm not either. God damn it. Don't you dare call me a fucking anarchist.
I implied it, okay? It was an implication.
Okay. Trump is anti-labor.
Oh, he's anti-labor
I think
as all
we can
hell.
make this a check mark.
Sure. Well, fine. If he's anti-labor, if that's what it takes to check that box off, okay.
Okay. Next one. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts. They have, this is an obvious check mark.
It's not just obvious. Come on. You're underselling it there by saying it's just obvious.
Yeah, well, the Trump administration is reportedly going to axe all funding for the arts, which is something like 0.002 of the federal budget. But, I mean, Trump is himself an anti-intellectual just in his existence. And the Republican Party is always against the arts and, you know, just critique of society in general.
Yep.
Okay, obsession with crime and punishment. Also very obvious check mark.
Yeah.
I think the stock prices for private prison industry went up, like skyrocketed when Trump was elected president. Because
be fair, it probably would have gone up if Clinton had been elected, because she was also being heavily paid by private.
Well, I would have if we were doing the same analysis on whether or not Clinton was a fascist, I would check this box off too.
That would be an interesting. Would the Clinton presidency have been fascist?
Huh.
I mean, because we're talking about Trump. This is a bit of an aside, but we're talking about Trump. We're talking about what has happened. I mean, a lot of what I've said is like, you know, it's historical, it's consequentialist, it's not Trump, it's not fascism, it's simply the direction American politics has been going in. Mm-hmm. And I guess that does necessarily
beg the question. Yeah.
If Clinton had been elected,
would this have been a sort of nicer, friendlier fascism?
Yeah. And is that good? Is that better or worse? Because nicer, friendlier fascism to me sounds terrifying.
Yeah, like fascism just more easily able to put through its policies.
Yeah, more people like it. More people want it.
And that is
that's fascist. What I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is that's the problem. I don't know. We'll never know. There's, you know, people will just have to play that out on fucking simulations forever after.
Do cosplays about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Rampant cronyism and corruption, I think, is a very obvious check mark for Trump, him having had his children on national security briefings and whatever, hiring his sons, hiring his children. I think it's very obvious that cronyism and corruption is rampant.
It's a return to classic American politics. You know, it's
what
great.
What do you mean?
Well, you know, when the Kennedys were all in the White House at the same time. It was all, oh, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's Camelot, it's the best. And we're just returning to that, that's all. Just right-wing Camelot.
Okay, so check mark. I think that Trump with his family business and whatever is clearly cronyism. The last mark is fraudulent elections. And clearly there's a bunch of controversy about Russia hacking the American election. And with the Trump party being apparently in on it. So is this a check mark?
No.
Why?
Well, I don't think the American election was fraudulent. Like, the presidential election was not fraudulent.
It was undemocratic, but not fraudulent.
Oh, fucking hell. You're damn right it was. The Electoral College is a sham. But, I mean, you know...
It is an affront against democracy.
Yes, and that's exactly what Trump said before the election.
Before it benefited him.
Yeah, before he won. And the Democrats loved the Electoral College because as they sort of saw it, it was, you know, a firewall against extremist politics.
People exactly like Trump.
Yeah, it will protect us from people like Trump. So they didn't care that it was undemocratic. And then afterwards, it was all, oh, well, the Electoral College is undemocratic, or, hey, hell, maybe the Russian leaks did something. I don't really think those Russian leaks had any actual impact on the election at all. Barely any people paid attention to that shit when it happened.
Yeah, that's true.
It was all like a bunch of fucking Bernie Sanders supporters who still couldn't stand the fact that he had endorsed Clinton were the only people who cared. when it came out. It was all like, she fucking fucked him over this whole time. It was a fucking sham. What a bunch of bullshit. And everybody else was all just like, well, yeah, who cares? She won and now is running against Trump. So what difference does it make? What did we learn from those leaks? That Clinton is a political insider with few scruples and a lot of friends.
Okay, well,
we already fucking knew that.
In continuing with the "is America itself fascist" sort of trend here in this conversation, gerrymandering could we consider gerrymandering, the rampant use and systemic use of it, to be itself election fraud?
No, and I think it's wrong ultimately, but I think election fraud speaks to a kind of well, in the case of a lot of fascist governments, they didn't use electoral fraud.
Right.
Historically. But if we're going to just include that for whatever reason.
It's the last point on the list.
Yeah. I think it's fair to sort of talk about. But the problem is that it relies on a lot of reverence for the political system.
Right.
You know, Trump broke the rules or whatever. Or, you know, the Russian hacking was an indiscreet breach of democratic governance in some way, even if it was just the internal documents of the Democratic Party. I guess what I'm saying is that fascism, to gain power, has not ever had to break the rules. And quite often, the people, the liberal argument against fascism is an appeal to the rules. I don't find it particularly useful to talk about the way in which the last election actually occurred, because either a relatively undemocratic system was subverted, or B, a relatively undemocratic system was abused. That's it. Those are the choices. Either Donald Trump won the presidency and lost the popular vote, or he won the presidency and lost the popular vote and benefited from Russian whatever.
Right.
I don't care. Those differences are very, very irrelevant to me.
Well, especially because America has been meddling in democratic elections the world over for generations now.
Sure. I mean, there's the hypocrisy portion of it, too. To me, like, this particular point speaks more to the outlook of the people who will talk quite a bit about the nature and character of that election, more than they'll talk about the nature and character of their political system. And this is the point I've just kind of can't give up, is that it's the political system that's failing.
Right.
The election is just a consequence of that. If there was someone better than Trump, he would have won the Republican primary.
So, is Trump a fascist or not? He's got almost every box checked off.
No, I mean, he might be. At the end, we may never know in his heart of hearts. At the end of the day, he could be secretly a fascist, a Nazi.
He's too fucking stupid to have an ideology.
He's too stupid to have a heart of hearts. He's too stupid to have layers.
Yeah.
He's exactly what he says he is.
Yeah.
A guy who wants to make America great again. And that's really kind of sad and honestly kind of scary. But ultimately, that is sort of the political reality that we're facing. And I think that's so much, to face that reality is so much more important than calling him a fascist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the best course of action is to use Trump and the Republican Party and the bullshit that they're pulling as a means to an end towards socialism. That, you know, these are obvious flaws within the current system that we have, and we need a new system. We need a new way of doing things. The system that we have right now produces people like Trump. Capitalism produces people like Trump, and that is the system that we're fighting against, and that's the system that we need to change.